Hello, it's Leah. Thank you for joining me today. And today we're going to be talking about 5 things that you can do as an ally to your fat buddies that will make a really positive difference in your relationships. These tips are going to be useful for people with fat relatives, people with fat friends, fat coworkers. These are ways to just make life a little bit less awkward or difficult for fat people in your life, how to support your fat loved ones, and also how do you act like a fat ally, basically. So the first thing that you can do to be a great fat ally is to unpack some of the understandings that you have that are misconceptions, the myths that you believe about fat people, and the stereotypes that you may believe about fat people. A really good example of this is that sometimes when fat people say, "I'm a fat person," or they say they might be out with their girlfriends or something and some lady might say, "I'm fat," a common response is, "You're not fat, you're beautiful." This is well-intentioned, but it's actually really misguided, because what that says is that being fat and being beautiful can't happen together, that those two are mutually exclusive. Instead of saying something like that, just accept that you can be both and just try to unpack that idea that somehow fatness is not compatible with being beautiful. There can be like super lovely people who are fat, and that's fine. You don't have to think about being fat as an insult. Lots of fat people will use it as sort of a reclaiming word, the way that like the queer community, we use the word queer as sort of a reclamation of a word that was used against members of the community some time ago, just to sort of put us down, right? And so we've taken that word back and said, no, we're like proud to be queer. This is something that you see also in the fat community around the word fat. It's something that was used to put us down, often as you know, kids in the schoolyard, things like that. We're reclaiming that word to say like, hey, this is a descriptive word. This isn't an insult. This is just a word that describes what does my body look like. I can be thin or I can be fat, and I am fat, and that doesn't have to have a negative connotation. So next time your friend says something about them being fat, try to really resist the urge to say, no, you're not, because you're lovely or because you're smart or because you're beautiful or whatever. Remember that they can be fat and be all of those things at the same time. The second thing you can do to be an ally to your fat loved ones is to just keep in mind, fat people probably have been told their whole life that they need fixing, and we don't. We're fine. Just try not to be the person who says, hey, I'm going to fix my fat friend. We are always bombarded with messages about our bodies. We're very aware of what the world thinks of us, that the world generally does think we need fixing, but we don't. If you feel like you need fixing, you're gonna try to fix yourself, or you'll ask for help. I had a friend some time ago that would just sort of be like, hey, like, have you had a walk today? Can I take you out for a walk? And it almost became like a thing where we'd be in our friend group and someone would be like, oh, who wants to take Leah for her walk today? As though I was like the dog. And so I just sort of remember thinking like, what is this weird dynamic that's happened where like they know what's best for me, I'm supposed to go along with it and just smile the whole time? Like, it was really bizarre. And it really gave me this feeling that like their love for me was conditional, or that like they were doing me a favor being friends with me, because really there was something very wrong with me, but they were so kind, they were at least trying to help me fix it. And so it's a kind of patronizing attitude, and it doesn't feel very nice. And so when your fat friends are in your presence, just try your best to not do those types of things where you're like, hey, I know this thing that will help you. Just try to sit back and be like, no, this person, they have the sense to do what they know is right for them. If they need my help, they'll ask me. The third thing you can do to be a good ally to your fat loved ones is to just believe them when they tell you stuff. We spend so much time as fat people moving through the world in our own bodies. We have so much experience understanding what that looks like. There are things that, because of all that experience, are pretty much impossible to explain to somebody else. We can sometimes explain it to other fat people, But even like the size of your body, like if you're a smaller fat person versus a bigger fat person, if you have a certain figure, like there are some fat people who have more of an hourglass shape and some people who don't. Certain body shapes are more, preferred by people. Depending on who you are, your experience may be really, really unique. When you're moving through the world and you notice something or you realize something, sometimes you may have no concrete evidence. It may be kind of like a gut feeling or an intuition or something. And sometimes people, when they hear about particularly bad things that you have a gut instinct about or you have some intuition about, they'll sort of say, oh, no, I'm sure that didn't happen, because they kind of want to believe that like bad things don't happen to people that they love. And it's so much easier to believe that than to believe that the world can be cruel. It's really important, though, to not invalidate the feelings of a person who actually had the experience. The best example I can think of this is that I had this roommate, love him to pieces, still consider him like my brother, but we at one point had been living together and I was looking for a job. And I had applied for a whole bunch of jobs. I had just left academia. I made a decision that it wasn't right for me. I was looking for a job mostly in the nonprofit sector. I had applied to a bunch of different things. And at one point I had just gotten back like a bunch of responses saying like, hey, sorry, it didn't work out. I would get one response from a place and they'd be like, well, your resume is not so strong. I'd get another response from a place where they were like, the interview wasn't great. They'd have another place where they were just like, oh no, like we just had like so many candidates that like it's nothing personal. And I was just like, I was really confused, because normally if like you don't interview well, that's the feedback you get. Or if you have a poor resume, that's the feedback you get. And so I was really getting suspicious, and I thought to myself, like, I think something's up here. Like I really think that this might not be what it appears to be. And so I had this instinct and I couldn't prove it. I couldn't prove it, but I do interview well. And I did have just a stellar resume, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get a job. And they were all declining me, and not for the same reason, but for different reasons every time. And I had said to my partner at the time, I don't want to be that person who's like too sensitive or like got a chip on her shoulder, thinks everyone's out to get her, whatever. But is it possible they're not hiring me because I'm fat? And my partner, to his credit, just the loveliest person, was like, I think that's possible. And so I had been at home and I kind of talked with my roommate about it, and he said, oh no, Aaliyah, I mean, that would be absurd. Why would someone not hire you for a reason like that? It was really a contrast in the ways that they accepted this information, right? On the part of my roommate, who, as I say, I still love to pieces, and I think his response really came from a good place. He was thinking, oh no, like that would just be like this like draconian, awful dystopia. Like I don't want to think about a world where you take a look at somebody's body and you think they're not qualified. Like that's absurd. And then you have my partner, who at the time was like kind of more familiar with like fat stuff and the stuff that I'd experienced and stuff. And he was like, you know what? I think that could be possible, Try to be that second person. Understand that just because you might not have really concrete, tangible evidence of something doesn't mean that you don't have just a wealth of experience to draw from, and that you don't know when something's fishy. Just to finish out that story, the next job interview I went to, I actually had a fly on the wall at the end of the interview. One guy looked at the other and said, she interviews great, but we can't hire her with that body. I was right. The fourth thing you can do to not be a jerk to the fat people that you love is to avoid diet talk around them. We are constantly reminded as fat people that most people in the world are scared to become like us. We get messages all the time about how undesirable it is to be fat, how much everybody wants to not be fat. We don't need further reminders in whatever context from our friends, our families, our colleagues. We don't need to be reminded that you don't want to be like us either. It's a really demoralizing thing to hear so many people around you be like, oh my God, you wouldn't want to be like, and insert exactly what you are. It's sort of like if you were like, oh my God, like I cannot believe how awful it is to have red hair. And then you're saying it in front of a redheaded person. Like, wouldn't they just kind of be like, gee, thanks, you know? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And yet I think like there's sort of this virtue signaling that happens where like, I'm gonna like broadcast to the world how good a person I am because I'm trying to become thinner. I think people either they forget to kind of put a filter on that when they're in front of the person that they're basically putting down by saying fatness is bad. Or sometimes I think people actually think, I know, I'll talk about my diet and maybe I'll inspire this fat person to go on a diet, as though we haven't thought about that 70 million times in our life without the reminder. But I think just put a lid on it when you're around fat people. We don't need the reminder that we're everything you're afraid to become. And the fifth thing, and maybe the most important thing that you can do to be a good fat ally, is to understand why fat people hate chairs. You're probably like, chairs? What are you talking about? Fat people hate chairs. It's like at the core of our soul, we just hate them. They're one of the biggest everyday stresses in a fat person's life. Be open to being an ally on that front. So whether it's thinking about chairs in advance for your friends to be helpful, whether it's just like asking people about if the chair situation is good for them in certain contexts. Say you're doing a work do and you have a fat colleague and you have a good relationship with them, they would probably actually really appreciate it and say, hey, I'm thinking about having this get together at such and such restaurant. Is there any reason why that wouldn't work out for you very well? Maybe that person's been at the restaurant and they're like, oh girl, I can't do that restaurant because their chairs are this wide and I'm this wide and they got arms on them. There's definitely a lot of stress around chairs, specifically chairs with arms and chairs that are not very sturdy. They're both really stressful because you can't fit in a chair with arms if it's too narrow. If you're trying to push your larger body into this chair, you're just going to be squished and like extremely uncomfortable. I actually once took a flight where the person at the desk had been trying to be helpful and she said, do you want to upgrade to like a more spacious seat? And I said, oh my God, yes, I would like to upgrade to that. That's great. And I remember paying extra for this seat. What she meant by more spacious was more legroom. What had actually happened is that instead of having a seat like all the others where like the arms would come up and I could have a little bit of extra space with the person beside me or whatever, which doesn't really matter if it's someone you know, and I was traveling to like a conference and stuff, I had like other people traveling with me. And so like instead of having that arrangement, she had put me in a place where like the seat had really like stuck in place arms and there was actually like a console just beside me. So like there was no way to get out of this tiny situation. I just remember having to like push myself down into the seat with so much force. And I just remember like when I got out of the plane, like I remember the next day looking at my hips and they were just covered in like black and blue and brown bruises because of the force I had to use to shove myself into this tiny seat. Airplanes are not made for fat people, but this woman had thought, I know this is a more spacious seat, maybe it'll be more comfortable for her, but the problem is not my legs. It is the width of the seat, and she had completely missed what would actually be helpful for me in that situation. So don't be like that lady. Think about chair widths. Think about if chairs don't have arms. Having no arms on a chair is really helpful for fat people because it means that they can balance on the top of the chair and they don't have to worry about being constrained on the sides. And so even if they're a little bit wider than the chair, it's not really a problem. With that, think also about the sturdiness of the chair because folding chairs are a nightmare for fat people because we're always the butt of the joke in movies and stuff like that. We've seen so many like skits and stuff where it's so funny when a fat person sits on something and it collapses. And so you're always terrified that like that's going to happen to you in real life. And like sometimes that will have happened to you in real life. Putting a fat person on a little folding chair that's kind of flimsy and like really like not a heavy duty chair is actually really stressful for fat people as well. And it doesn't have to be a folding chair. It could be any number of things. If it's not a really sturdy chair, try to make sure that it's not the one that the fat person's going to be sitting on. If you have a party or something and you have a couple of like really sturdy sturdy chairs or like a sofa or something that's like a little bit more appropriate, try to kind of encourage people who are smaller, more lightweight, to be using the chairs that are not as heavy duty. And then your friend will have a really comfortable place to sit. This will really, really reduce the amount of stress that your friend has about attending things at your house, about being able to actually access that space and to have a good time and not spend the whole time worried that they're going to fall on their butt. So this has been 5 different things that you can do to be a better fat ally to the people that you care about. I hope that in this video you've learned a little bit of something about how you can do better, how you can be more caring and more sensitive to the needs of your fat colleagues, friends, and family, and just really to have a little bit more compassion for the things that are just sort of day-to-day things for us, that you can kind of do your part not to make our problem more often than we have to. This is a really simple list of stuff that you can do. It's not really difficult to do any of this stuff. It really just takes a little bit of forethought and sensitivity and a little bit of just making sure that you're being the best version of yourself around your fat friends. So thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. You can of course subscribe. I upload videos every Wednesday, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye for now.